Those who are signed up to my thoughts, there was something on Ganesha yesterday. And so maybe we should go through a little bit on that. The whole idea of an anthropomorphic kind of concept of God, some historians may say was introduced by Greeks into India. Because of course the Greeks had a whole pantheon of deities, and as a result they introduced it, or seem to introduce that now, to the Indian subcontinent. Prior to that, nature was seen to be multiple in its forces and express itself in some material ways. So for example, fire is something you can see, something you can feel, but there's also radiance behind it. There's also some energy there. So this is how it was seen. So the obvious visual aspect of a deity would have been in the lightning, in the sun, in the moon, in the stars, in the fire, in the breath, and so on. And this is reflected in the Upanishads as well. And so I think later, after, let's say, 300 or so BCE, when Indians came to the subcontinent of India, Greeks came to the subcontinent of India, they may have brought their pantheon with them. And of course, the only people of ancient culture who had a deity with a mixture of animals and humans were the Egyptians. So the Egyptians had the falcon head and the human body. And India is kind of like historically a sponge. They accept everything, integrate it. And this is the wonderful thing. Instead of having a Greek pantheon where all the deities behaved disgracefully, they absorbed it and said, no, I think we can make something of it. And so how do we make something of a deity with an elephant head and so on? Of course, to explain it, we can make a mythological story or a number of them. The most common mythological story surrounding it was to do with Parvati. Parvati is the feminine aspect of the universal Shiva, the auspicious one. And so Shiva, the story goes, Parvati was bathing and she was putting turmeric on, and she being married to Shiva, Shiva representing the supreme Brahman, Shakti representing the universe, the cosmos as such, and all the energy that goes with it, both energy and matter. And so to get some privacy, Shiva's vehicle, the bull. Now we mentioned previously the significance of a bull, representing solidity, loyalty, faith, and representing matter, if you like, because 4 directions are there, 4 geographical directions are there, and 4 feet are planted. And also the bull is a manifesting thing. It manifests all the cows and calves and so on and so forth through its mating. So it represents a manifesting potential that's standing in the way of Shiva gaining access to Parvati. And so we can start to see now the philosophical implications of the story. Parvati, of course, is not happy with this because worldliness does not want a divine intrusion. We have many satisfactory or so-called satisfactory distractions in the world. So we want to keep it like that. So Parvati in the story makes from the scurf of her body and the turmeric there a boy. She has a son of her own. Let me have a son. Since Nanda, the bull, cannot protect me from Shiva's entry. And Nanda failed to block Shiva from gaining access to Parvati. So this boy was there and naturally became very fierce because it is nature's own product, designed for a specific purpose. What is that purpose? The purpose is to block our divinity, represented as Shiva. And so the little boy is our own ego, our own egoistic tendencies. More than anything else, more than all the kleshas mentioned, from ignorance. Ignorance is the mother of them, it goes now to egoism, and then attraction, attachment, the opposite of it, rejection. And then from there, of course, to clinging on to life. So these are the classical kleshas mentioned by yoga philosophy. This ego, how do we combat it? Now, last weekend, we didn't have any class like this because we were engaged in the Enneagram and the Essence of Truth. And it is precisely dealing with this whole matter of ego, which is not a standard thing. It comes in an individual way because we develop our own internal protection that protects the status quo of who we think we are, an embodied entity, and separates us, keeps us separate from our divine nature, representing here as Shiva. So naturally, Shiva now comes along, that is the urge for perfection, comes along and finds this obstinate thing in the way. And just as the head, we have this phrase, a block, somebody who's obstinate is a blockhead. And so it knocks the block off this boy. And naturally, if we look at it as a mere story, we are completely puzzled why the divine Shiva should do this to an innocent boy, until we understand that this egoism developed from childhood, but willing to replace it with wisdom, an emblem of wisdom. Where can we find an emblem of wisdom? Where can we find somebody facing the north direction? That is, with an intention toward perfection and freedom. And so all the deities go looking for this. All the beings, divine beings, go looking for this. And they find an elephant. Some stories will say that it was the divine element that was produced from the churning of the ocean. Anyhow, that elephant's head was found and placed on the boy, and life was infused into that boy, and this became Ganesha. So Ganesha would symbolize two things: a body of a human representing our own limited microcosm, and the elephant representing the big head that is the cosmic mind itself. This universe is a macro version of what we have locally here. Here we have a body. Here we have a head. Here we have intelligence. We have a mind. Here we have energy. Cosmos also has it. The whole of the cosmos is deemed to be this body, this divine body. And the head or the intelligence is this buddhi, this cosmic mind. This is the arrangement put out to us by Sankhya and then developed into the theology. The theology that says that there is a Brahma, that is, that there is a potentially expanding entity that has a creative function. And that creative function is not so much to do with creating something from nothing or creating something from a pre-existing material, but manifesting itself in the world, being the word that gets made flesh and dwells amongst us. That becomes the entire cosmos, entire world for us. So how do we get access to our divine nature? We have to ruthlessly chop the head of our ego off, our egocentric position that says, I am so-and-so, self-image, the position that assumes I am an embodied one with a separate mind. Our sense of individuality is the problem that divides everything everywhere. Now, it's not that we get rid of a function. It's that we make the function as a more expanding thing. We now make it the Lord of the universe. We make it that one which serves as an open channel to spread divine grace everywhere. And the principal thing then in spiritual life is removing obstacles. In the ancient days, we had no mechanical tractors. What removes, and in some cultures still today, what removes debris, what lifts things up worth many tons? It has to be some strong thing, and the elephant was trained, cultivated, and employed. It was the tractor of its day. Not only the tractor, but it was also used in combat. So it was the tank of its day. The tank of its day. And unfortunately, in the era of warfare where firearms were used, explosive was used in the form of guns and weapons and cannons, mainly cannons, then of course the elephants got destroyed. The tank of its day was destroyed by a more sophisticated kind of weapon. And the other thing, of course, was rules of chivalry were broken. On these two counts, invaders came and managed to conquer all the armies of the day. So we have to conquer this particular self-image that we have, which is centered around an embodied entity, and the particular structured compulsion that is its cornerstone. When we do the Enneagram, we know Enneagram means 9 points, 9 numbers. We know from this that there are 9 key motivating factors that form some strategic defense for us to preserve our status quo. And it's the status quo that we're unwilling to give up. We're unwilling to surrender. 2 ways are there to surrender it. One way is the way of devotion, and using Ganesha itself and the whole symbolism of that, elevated to the status of a cosmic mind. We can now put the whole of the Godhead into it and say, what does it represent? Why is it shaped in this way? And it is shaped in this way because it is the absolute embodiment of the sound symbol Om in the Devanagari script. The Devanagari script. So the Devanagari script will have it, if you see the Om carefully, or if you see Ganesha carefully, you can see the pot belly, the curve of the Om. You can see the trunk coming out. You can see half a tusk coming out. So all of these things are there. Ganesha is the embodiment, the representation, if you like, of the Om, and the Om is a sound expression of the first creative movement and is therefore the creator itself. The sum totality of everything. It is this elephant that is used in many cultures actually to represent some quality of strength. So the pot belly is there, it represents our prosperity. And with every icon, when you investigate it, you see it as a meditative tool, something that will give you access to the inner, deeper life. Away from the form. The form itself leads you to a formless aspect, ultimately. And so to study the form and the symbols and the hand gestures are all important because they all have a deep meaning. I mentioned the head represents the macrocosm. Body represents the local microcosm, you and I. We have to replace the headquarters, if you like, this key compulsion with a cosmic mind. We have to align our will to that of God's will. Thy will be done. And once we do that, then we have a free access everywhere. We think silly thought, but a natural thought by the same token, that we have an individual mind. We say we have to change our mind. Well, it's not the mind that has to change. The mind is always really there. It's a universal thing. No more can we change the broadcast of the BBC or any other radio broadcast. We can change our transistor. We can change our local radio, but the station remains because the airwaves are there. And the airwaves are part of an electromagnetic system that is always present, an all-permitting, all-pervading entity that stands everywhere. Given enough space, we find it everywhere. Given enough time, we can tune into it and bring it within our range, bring the frequency and the wavelength by certain tuning mechanisms, bringing it into the ear and bringing a recognition of it into the brain. A whole series of neurological activities take place to hear one thing. You're hearing me now, you're also seeing. But what are you doing? You're absorbing photons with a delay factor. So small, you hardly notice it. And the airwaves are there present, being carried over a microphone system and put back into the electromagnetic field. You tune into it on your side, and it comes out through your PC or whatever device you're using. And then it doesn't stop there. Those waves have to be carried to the air. The vibration has to be there in the tympanum. And then finally it comes to the neurological setup called the brain. And then there has to be some unseen, subtle recognition from memory. It is this, all happening within a few splits of a second. So rapidly we hardly notice the discontinuity of it. It all looks like one continuous movie. So such is God's grace flowing to us. But one way to conquer the ego then is through devotion. We can take any form we like, any term we love the most. And the form of Ganesha is one of the most beloved forms. Ganesha and Krishna are the two most popular in Hindu spiritual culture. And the Western culture has taken it, not understanding it, put it on t-shirts and underwear and all kinds of things, not understanding the deep significance. The Sanskrit for elephant, gajja, is there. Gajja, ga, can represent gata, mean goal. And janma means something that is born. Something that is born to take us from there to a goal. And so the significance of an elephant can be put in that way. It reminds us of a goal and also the means to take us to there. In India, it's a novelty for visitors, say, into Rajasthan. In Rajasthan, one big fort on a hill, and people go up by elephant, tourists and what have you, during COVID-free times. We'll take a ride on an elephant all the way up the hill. In zoos throughout the world, people pay for an elephant ride and so on. And you rock nicely there. In the ancient days, or not so ancient even, then royalty was carried on the back of the elephant. Still in Nepal, that's the style of a royal procession. So something that carries you on, something that carries us on with certain equipment. The equipment means the divine ego has to be there. Now, the second way of taking away this thing, this ego, and dealing with it, is instead of saying, I'm a devotee and Lord, you are there, replacing the ego with a royal presence, making the Lord of the universe the supreme ego within you, and seeing its presence flowing everywhere, through every hand, through every eye, through every ear. And if you like, we can alternate these two positions. One position would be suitable for Jnana Yoga. The other would be suitable for Bhakti Yoga. And the Bhakti Yoga does not diminish or contradict the Jnana Yoga. Shankaracharya, the great non-dualist, would have everywhere songs and hymns of praise. But in every form, bring it to the ultimate unity of existence. And so the whole Sundara Lahari is there in praise of God as a mother. Then you have Bhajare, Govinda, hymns to Govind, hymns to Krishna. In his day, he identified 5 different religious sects within the subcontinent of India, as we know it. And one was worship of Ganesha. Ganesha was one of those, established then, at least in the 8th century. And we know even before that, evidence from coins and so on, the significance at least of the elephant. So some people have taken this as a kind of tribal deity, whatever it is. The lesson for us is, don't dismiss anything. Don't dismiss it, as some religions might, and relegate it, because it's unfamiliar, relegate it to an area of that can be easily demonized. We do that with everything, isn't it? Somebody doesn't follow what I follow, or the political party that I have, or something like that, we tend to demonize. So unfortunately, whenever there's a political race, ad hominems are used mainly to destroy your opponent, because you want everybody to think and behave as you think and behave, and you want to form a mutual admiration society. It's much, much better to understand fully the other position, to have empathy, not necessarily to seek agreement, but to seek understanding. Can we understand this? Instead of putting it meaninglessly and irreverently onto a t-shirt. If the Hindus had a mindset like the Muslims, there would be riots in the streets over this. If you suddenly put Muhammad onto t-shirts and what have you, and of course we know you don't poke any fun about it in cartoons and what have you. So this understanding of reverence is there, and sometimes I think people who follow these systems are so mild-mannered that they forget the idea of insisting on reverence, insisting on at least addressing the understanding that is necessary. We can use that and apply that in every single field, every social field, political field, every universal problem or difficulty that we have, and in our own domestic arrangements. If we are able to do, then the world will be a much better place because we have this empathy. What is empathy? Empathy is having such feeling that you stand where the other person is standing. You observe carefully their style of communication. And with a non-critical attitude, you try and at least feel what they feel. This requires very great capacity to observe correctly, body language, selected words, and to try and feel what the other person is feeling, because most communication is not factual information flow. We can get that from the internet. It's trying to understand the emotional message that is coming through in communication. And understanding that, we may not agree with the other person, but certainly we will be able to stand in the other person's shoes or wear the other person's moccasins, is the expression. So that is to feel what the other person is feeling, to feel the rocks that a person is wearing. I don't know if you've ever worn any moccasins, but you can feel every stone underfoot. Every thorn, every stone is felt. So I think it's good to wear another person's moccasins, even though they may be made in China, and try to feel what the other person is feeling. Then we can compassionately communicate with the person because we understand fully. So in terms of this, the form of Ganesha is extremely profound. Just in summary, representing this Omkara symbol, and in all the items representing, the pot belly represents prosperity. And understand that in some cultures, Buddhist cultures, this Ganesha is seen as a benign aspect and in its malignant aspect too, malign aspect as well. Because that same breaker of obstacles can also present the obstacles. It just depends. It depends if we're a devotee or we wish to master the elephant for our own ends and replace the head with a swollen head of our own egoism. Now the sweetness, the laddu and so on that is Ganesha is purported to enjoy represents the divine bliss. Equally, it could represent attachment to taste. The rat on which this entity sits presents us with a very comedic kind of picture, but I think it was introduced very late into Hindu culture. But it represents a number of things because the rat is prolific. If we're not careful, our desires will spread everywhere and take control. But the rat also requires grain, and the rat can be a good vehicle because it's subtle. It's the subtleness that we require in spiritual life. And the obvious grossness, if you will, in spiritual life is the strength and power to remove obstacles. All spiritual life is removing obstacles. The obstacle of attachment, the obstacle of our outlook is the main obstacle. This is collectively called ignorance. And therefore, the antidote to remove it is knowledge. And we do that, as I say, through two principal ways. One is making ourselves the servant of the divine, the love of the divine, the child of the divine. Any of these aspects are there. A number of selected aspects can be there in the art of bhakta or bhakti. So bhakti yoga provides us with a number of different approaches. And we can find out what the most suitable approach is for us. This also depends on our personality, by the way, because our personality might be very, very loving toward children, more than anything else. In which case, why don't we transfer that to God? Why don't we think of God as a child? I think I may have told you before, when I first moved here and making friends with local people, the most influential person in any parish in Ireland will be the priest, Catholic priest. So making friends with him, first of all, he is asking, are you a religion? I said, no, we're a philosophy. But do you believe in God? What kind of God do you believe in? I said, that's a very personal question, because it depends on your approach. And then I explained to him these various moods that are there in many different religions. For example, in the Catholic Christian religion, you have the opportunity to worship God as a child at Christmas, the birth of the Christ child. Then you have the opportunity to worship God as a kind of power, a kind of Holy Spirit, very often configured as a dove, a shining dove. And then you have the opportunity of worshiping God as an incarnation, as a word made flesh, some entity, big wave that came to make an impact for several thousands of years, called a Jesus or a Christ, an anointed one. And then you have the opportunity of thinking of God as a father. And in the Catholic religion, despite the fact that it goes against the theological grain to say so, Catholic meaning Eastern and Roman, the idea of worshiping God as a mother is also there. And so there are so many of these similarities. What does your personality require? And so in this form of Ganesha, throughout the whole of India, people worship this entity, making it of clay, understanding, if you're ever falling under a criticism about idol worship and so on and so forth, because just as with the image that is created at Durga Puja in Bengal, the image ultimately is taken and put into the water, either the sea or a river or a well, so that the clay just goes back to its original material. So the whole of the worship is to infuse what you're worshiping with divinity. That's the first step. And having infused this clay image and having enjoyed this worship and the symbolism of it and gotten a connection with God in this form, you now take this and you dissolve it and allow it to go back from whence it came. Hopefully during that whole process, you will have understood that all matter is infused with divinity. That is why the mythological story that explains the head of Ganesha, Ganesha, Ishvara, the Lord of Gana, beings, groups of beings. We can say, therefore, all beings, all categories of beings, is also Vinyeshvara, the remover of obstacles. And many other epithets are attributed to Ganesha. 108 names are there available, as with any other form, to lovingly repeat. And as you do that, the more universal aspect comes through about it. It then becomes, for many non-Hindus, a transference from some cute thing on a t-shirt to something that is profound and something that will lead you in a higher way, a higher dimension. So this is all on Ganesha. It has its roots, of course, in the Vedas. So the Rig Veda has a passage really aimed at Brihaspati, but identified with Ganesha. And as a religion develops, the most ancient religions will develop. That's a test of their antiquity. And with this development will be change. An adaptation will have to be made to suit the times much more, away from the yajnas of the forests away from the fire ceremonies and havans. And as other cultures come in and blend, and as we discover other customs, tribal customs and others, can incorporate these. What a wonderful thing it is to absorb the various aspects of different cultures without denying them, without saying, I'm right, you're wrong, absorbing them and then elevating them in a much higher way, so that these become vehicles to lead us to the inner truth of our own divine nature. Vedanta begins and ends with asserting your own divine nature, your own inner divinity, and doesn't deny any approach, doesn't deny any theology at its core. The details, of course, will vary, but at its core does not deny it, and is generous enough to say, take any form that you love. Why is Ganesha so popular? Because Ganesha has this playful aspect to it. Same thing with Krishna. And so actually in the form of a baby, really, see? So there can be a Bala aspect to it as well. So all of these are taken for our convenience. You can take all of them, you can take one of them, or none of them. It's entirely up to you. But I certainly, one thing that is necessary in spiritual life that removes the obstacles is the capacity for artistic creation. We have to use the imagination. Artistic imagination is the one fundamental tool that we have as humans. And to employ this in art, in culture, in forms of drama, in forms of music, painting, making forms, creating rituals, dance, enacting the play which already is there. What we call life is, after all, just a play. There's no other reason why this life should be here, except that it is Lord's play on himself. All right.
Swamiji?
Yes. Yes, Philip.
It's Philip.
Yes.
You've given a very good explanation of Ganesha and the kind of concept of a deity. Could you just say a little about the idea of Istha Devta, the meditation deity, how you kind of work with these deities in a kind of meditational way?
Yes, certainly. You see, it comes back also to what I was saying about your own psychology. Let's give you an example. Supposing you had a jealous and punishing parent, father, say, then it would be something of a mistake to think of God as your father. Is it necessary to think of God in any form? Well, it's not necessary, it's not essential, but it is much easier. So the 12th chapter, the Bhagavad Gita, mentions this and brings this subject up. And it gives us various alternatives. It asks this question, should we have a chosen ideal? Now, it doesn't put it in this language, but what is a chosen ideal? So Vivekananda puts it in a funny way. If we were fish, we would have a fish god. If we were cows, we would have a cow god. Because we're human, we have a human god. What does that mean? Supposing my cultural theology prohibits any form whatsoever. Let us take, for example, in Islam or Judaism. Then it becomes quite difficult. So what is the ultimate principle in the universe? No mind, no body, no features, no characteristics. This is called Brahman. Brahman as distinct from God. Maybe we come to it in the close concepts of Meister Eckhart when he talks about the Godhead. Something that is completely transcendent, not within our grasp. And so how do we bring something that has no moving parts or no parts in space, no movement in time, no evidence of evolutionary change? How do we bring it within the scope of our understanding and form a connection which is necessary? And as long as we feel that we are embodied, then we really have to try to get to grips in an easy way as possible, and embody our God. And so Ishta Devta, Ishta, this is our chosen form of the Lord, our chosen form of God. Even this language is misleading because we've put a gender on it. But God can be masculine, can be feminine, can be neutral. God can be a thing. Let's take, for example, that type of formlessness which takes a form of Ishvara. Now, we have to make a distinction. I mentioned a transcendent principle, supreme principle. But we have to see how this supreme principle manifests as a potentiality. This potentiality we call God. But we're not putting any form to it. We are putting attributes to it. These attributes can be, and they are quote from the Quran, we say, all loving, all merciful. We can extend it because most of those concepts would incorporate omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence. So we have really given some limitation to this entity, but we've also made it limitless. We have defined it in a certain way. After all, do you have any other examples of omnipresence? We have some kinds of clue. Space seems to be omnipresent. So even that we can imagine as space. Even that we can manage as maybe the infinite sky or water where there's an endless horizon, an ocean. And so Vivekananda also mentions this fact that even a Muslim who denies all forms, who will say to have any form will be anathema, will at least have qualities and will at least have some image in their mind, since we are all image makers. Let me give an example. When you say Allah, it's a word. Every word has a corresponding concept to it. We can't avoid it. Some picture will come. So to avoid something that is defined, you think of it in a representational way. Some endless space, the blackness of a night sky, or the endlessness of a blue sky. And these concepts also come into form. Now, when you have this entity, and when I say form, I mean anthropomorphic form. So now, how do you relate to something that is completely abstract and transcendent? You bring it down, as it were, or you bring it within the range of our understanding. Even so, it still can be fairly abstract. And the difficulty with something being abstract is this personal connection that moves the heart will not be there. An amorphous presence can be there. So one of the attitudes is to have this amorphous sense of presence. And this is the shonya, this is the way of contentment. Having an Ishta Devta where your attitude is one of a continuous presence. Now we go back to Shankaracharya, who identified that there were sects who worshipped Ganesha, there were sects who worshipped Shakti, that is feminine energy or energy in a feminine form. There were those that worshipped Shiva, and there were those who worshipped Shaurya, that is the sun, and also those who worshipped Vishnu. So in his day already 5 distinct sects had formed. In this same way, that in Hinduism there are the Orthodox who are Vaishnavites exclusively, Shaivites exclusively, but there will be, and maybe there'll be ones who are Shaktiyats exclusively, but the vast majority will take the spirit of the Upanishads and they will be what we call smartas. That is, they will see that every form is just a different form of the same entity. And in these modern days, from Ramakrishna onwards, we have extended that and say Christian forms also, and any other forms that we can think of. Because if God made the world with countless forms, can he not make a form for you, his devotee? But we start off with what is the attitude? What is our psychological approach that suits us most? And then to select. So in answer to the parish priest, I was saying, Well, you see, it's a very, very personal question you asked, all right? And I will not answer, but I'll answer you in a general way, that these various attitudes are there, what we call bhavas, these certain approaches that we have. And that approach will determine what Ishta Devta or chosen ideal you choose. So to bring it, as it were, away from the transcendent to something that you can relate to, and if that's difficult, and most people find it is, to something that is now personal. And Ramakrishna used a beautiful example. I've used it before. It's something like water. Water is formless, but under right conditions, we see it as an iceberg or a block of ice. The block of ice is still water in a different form. How do we understand it in its formless aspect? Now I'll extend the example a little bit. With the burning love of the devotee and the burning love of the Lord that created a form for you to worship, for you to contact and relate to. And with your burning love, that dissolves the ice and goes back into the formless. The 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita begins with the same question like this. It asks you, or Arjun asks, he says, and he starts out with this question. Those devotees who ever steadfast worship you, the Lord, thus, and those who worship the imperishable, the unmanifest, which of these are better versed in practice of spirituality that we call yoga? Arjuna vacha evam satatyukta ye bhaktas tvam paryupasati. And then the Lord has to answer. He says, those who worship me meaning, in this combination of transcendence and immanence, fixing their minds on me, ever steadfast and endowed with supreme faith, them I regard as my best spiritual practitioners or yogins. So that is with form, in other words. Those who worship me, that is with a form. Fixing your mind on me, form and attributes. Ever steadfast, of course. That's the whole idea. When we worship God with form, it has to be steady. Steadiness means it entrenches concentration in us. It allows us to fix our minds so that it doesn't waver. And so we have to have the supreme faith that the Lord is there with us, walking with us, in front of us and everywhere, as a friend, as a lover, as a mother, as a father, whatever aspect you adopt. But those who worship the imperishable, the indefinable, the unmanifest, aksharam, the unmanifest, avyaktam, the indefinable, the omnipresent, the inconceivable, the unchanging, the immovable, the eternal, having subdued all the senses, even minded under all conditions, that is without a form of God, but even minded, these are the conditions, and devoted to the welfare of all beings. It was a very great criticism of conquering nations who were aligned to a particular religion when they conquered India, to say, you see, it's all about meditation and leaving the world, and it's all about selfishness. Hindus also made the same mistake in their understanding about it. But here it is, that those people who went and led a dedicated life to discover this unmanifest, this complete unchanging one, this eternal one, they're doing it out of pure selfishness. They have no compassion for the poor. But here it says, no, devoted to the good of all beings, having a spirit of welfare for all. Truly they come unto me. In other words, those who believe in a form, that is the selection of a defined Ishta Devta, and those who don't, actually they both come to me. We make an equal thing. +1, -1. But let's be practical. So here's klesho dikataras tesham. Greater is their difficulty, whose minds are set on this unmanifest. For the goal of the unmanifest is very hard. What makes it hard? For those who are, see, they have a beard. For those who have a sense of embodiment, as long as you think I am so-and-so and assert your individuality, it's a difficult job. So let's point this in practicality out. You can choose this other one if you like, Nirguna Brahman if you like, but Saguna Brahman, it's a little easier. Now, those who consecrate their actions to me, regarding me as the supreme goal, and who worship me, meditating on me with single-minded devotion. In other words, those who are bhaktas, following the path of bhakti yoga. To them whose minds are thus absorbed in me, says Krishna, I truly soon become the deliverer from the ocean of this transmigratory existence that always produces us pleasure, pain, and ultimately we never get out of it. And so it's beset with death. We are looking for immortality. The emphasis in the Vedanta is immortality. And so he says, fix your mind on me alone, let your thoughts dwell on me. Hereafter you will live in me alone. Of this, there's no doubt. As long as a person has a sense of individuality and have some kind of compassion or some kind of emotion, even anger, then they should consider this path of devotion as an easy route. And Vedanta allows you to have a wide scope, a huge toolbox, so that you don't have to stick to that. You can allow that, of course, to open up into the other side of the coin, and that is this aspect of non-dualism. You can have both. So what is this non-dualism? Is not the summit of endeavor. It is an all-encompassing, broad toolbox, broad spectrum of facilities that you have. And just as you can play on a musical instrument, a whole range of notes, you can decide which note is appropriate when. Don't continue making one note at a high pitch, you'll be a public nuisance. So be free to play the whole range. That would be wonderful. And enjoy this idea of the sweetness of devotion, as well as this aspect of pure existence and consciousness and bliss. And where's the example? The example is Ramakrishna. Ramakrishna easily glided across the borders. He could easily be a child of the mother. And then he could as easily be there immersed in his nirvikalpa samadhi. He could as easily see the divine working through all the hands and legs. See that example? Suffering from cancer, and those who love him are begging, can't you take some food? Every time he puts it in, it spills out. For our sake, at least do it. Why don't you ask the mother? You're a child of the mother. Please, can you take a little food and recover for us? Just for our sake, will you do it? And like a child, because he's a child, he accepts it. And then in consultation, he comes almost wagging his finger. What did the mother say? Why do you want to feed through this mouth? See, you're feeding through all these mouths. Seeing this from a non-dualistic perspective, seeing this capacity to eat with all mouths, all hands, all eyes, all mouths, this universal aspect, he has this dimension, if you will. So this Istha Devta is an important part of the selection process of seeing how we can use our creative imagination. And we don't have to necessarily look for it, because there would be a match. We will find a natural affinity for that aspect of God that we love the most. And very often that aspect comes to us with a guru, because the guru will be something like a matchmaker. So, Philip, this is your Istha Devta, this is Philip. Now have a love affair. So it's a wonderful thing to enjoy that sweetness of a divine relationship, and also to enjoy the ocean that stands behind it. I think it's a great mistake amongst contemporary non-dualists who have followed maybe somebody like Ramana Maharshi. And Ramana Maharshi's teachings coming out in a modern format as books, The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle, and so on. There's absolutely every element of truth within them. But how do we practice it? How do we make it practical for ourselves? And we can go back 5,000 years and read what Krishna has had to say and listen to that. Or we can update and look at the great mystics, look at Ramakrishna Paramahansa, and see how he was a totality of experience. What a wonderful totality of experience. Something for all, a huge cosmic supermarket for us to dip into. If you don't like this, well, there's this. Krishna himself did it. So he's saying, fix your mind. That's the formula. Fix your mind on me. But you see, and the last time I mentioned this, actually, Padma will recognize this, was in France, because the question came up in an evening question answer session. So you see, not many people can do that. So many distractions are around, particularly in this modern world of technology. How can we fix our mind on anything? And it was true then as well. Is that easy to fix your mind? So, no, not easy. But that's another way. We can, because we're suffering from forgetfulness, have a technique called remembrance. And so the next step would be Atachitam datam. If you're not able, actually, na shaknoshi mayi stiram. If you're not able to do this fixity, to fix your mind steadily on me, then you can seek to reach me by the yoga of constant practice. What is it called? Abhyasa yoga. Abhyasa yogana tato mam ichaptam dhananjaya. Every time the mind wanders off, you bring it back. Come on. Like a dog wandering in a park. Come on, whistle, bring it back, bring it back. Each time it wanders, bring it back. So this constant remembrance is there. And we have many tools to do it. We have songs, we have bhajans, we have festivals such as this Ganesha Chaturthi. We have festivals in Christianity. Every day is a saint's day in the Christian calendar. We have japa of various kinds. We have mantras. We have the capacity for Istha Devta, forming an image that you like, forming a relationship with a living, active, speaking God, and somebody who is a listening entity as well, some entity that is absolutely real to us. And so we have all these tools and facilities, holy people, teachers. We have the capacity to read holy literature, study scripture. All of these things are there. In the Viveka Shuddhavani of Shankaracharya, he says in very strong language that if you're not using these opportunities, this very birth and all the opportunities that it presents is equivalent to suicide. Having been given this body very hard to attain and reach. Every human is valuable because it took a long time and long effort to come to this point. So don't squander it. And we have the facility of time. We have the facility of space. We have this facility of intelligence. And furthermore, all of you listening here would have been drawn in some way to this foolish thing here with a beard. or to this ashram, or to some text, or something like that. So I think it's a great pity when non-dualists think that they are in some way superior, or think that there should be no devotion or any of these other things, because Shankaracharya did not have this position. And Shankaracharya is the model of the Advaitic teachings. But he saw things, you see, from nature's point of view. His grand teacher saw it from the transcendent point of view. And so we find that in his commentary on the Mandukya Upanishad, with 12 short verses there, telling us of essentially the most convincing argument for non-dualism. And in the commentary there, Gaudapada is taking the transcendent view. Shankaracharya is taking the immanent view. Both are correct. Neither is exclusive. Now, supposing it's difficult to bring the mind back constantly, is there another way? Yes. So if you're incapable of constant practice, this abhyasa yoga, this bringing the mind back, this constant remembrance, then be intent on doing actions for my sake. Do every action for the Lord. And even by performing actions as offerings, even by doing that, you'll attain this goal of perfection, this goal that everybody actually wants. The whole universe is moving toward a state of perfection. And that's why we have a universe. When you study it closely, you'll see it's true. But even if you can't do that, even if you say that's too difficult for me, then even if you can't do that, then taking refuge in me, be self-controlled and renounce the fruit of all actions. Sri Ramakrishna's famous miracle disciple of Girish Chandra Ghosh, he complained, I can't do all this worship and this and that, this meditation and so on and so forth. I don't have the time. And my lifestyle, I'm an actor and a playwright. I have a bohemian lifestyle. So what to do? Well, at least every time you eat, you can think of God. Yeah, I never know when I'm eating. You see, that's my lifestyle. All right, at the end of it, never mind. Give me your power of attorney. I'll do it for you. You're delighted. You thought it was easy. Taking refuge in God is not easy. To demonstrate this once, famously, Girish Chandra said, oh, I'll do this tomorrow. No, you have no capacity to do that. You have no will of your own. You remember you gave it to me. And all his life was a great, great example of a wonderful devotee who purely lived under God's will, surrendering himself completely. So let go of results. Even if you do a little bit of letting go of these results, letting go of the fruits, that will be a good route, because that's the next stop. If you can't do that, if you can't offer all these activities, then taking refuge in me, be self-controlled and renounce all the fruit of your actions. Don't be results-orientated. Don't think that you have any actions of your own. You have no rights in the system, by the way. The liberal idea of you have human rights and this right and that right. Bhagavad Gita says, no, none of these are yours, because it's not your body, it's not your energy, nor is it your results. Results don't belong to you, they belong to another. They belong to the source and author of your life. So that being the case, you have no right to anything, not even the right to a breath. You think, I breathe. No. The Lord inside is pumping your lungs, inflating them, deflating them. You don't pump your heart, you don't move your lungs, you don't digest your food, you don't renew your cells. None of this do you do. You don't go and purchase a pocket full of air. None of this is available to you. And so understanding that and realizing that through the process of being self-controlled, renouncing the fruit of actions, why don't you do that? So all of these various alternatives and options are open to us. Nobody can say, I can't. It's beyond my capability. There's something for everybody in this. All right. So this is all around the subject again of Istha Devta, the chosen ideal. And I think a previous question might have been about Diksha, Guru, and all of this. These are interrelated topics because it is the Guru that has the insight. You think that you're going along this line. Actually, your chosen ideal should be more like this. And you should then adopt this. This then opens a floodgate of internal divine feelings. Thank you. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace. Peace be unto all.